Batman was a movie that came out in 1989 and starred Michael Keaton as Batman and Jack Nicholson as the Joker. It made about $411.3 million, which is about $800 million when adjusted to inflation. Today it's been overshadowed by Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, as well as a bunch of other Batman stories across a whole bunch of different mediums. Batman is everywhere. Batman is easily one of the most famous superheroes on the entire planet. It hasn't always been this way, though. Before shared universes and before superhero movies made billions of dollars at the box office annually, very few superhero movies were considered to be made as major motion pictures, but luckily Batman was one of them. Despite what most people think, Batman 1989 wasn't the first Batman movie. There were two 15-part series of serials that were made in the 1940s.
Batman, who even now is pondering the plans of a new assault against the forces of crime. A crushing blow against evil in which he will have the valuable aid of his young, two-fisted assistant, Robin, the Boy Wonder.
The serials starred Lewis Wilson as Batman, and they're not really remembered all that much except for their flippant racism.
This was part of a foreign land transplanted bodily to America and known as Little Tokyo. Since a wise government rounded up the shifty-eyed Japs, it has become virtually a ghost street.
Welcome to my humble abode, Miss Praise.
A Jap!
Pleased to say Nipponese.
The most well-known example of Batman on the big screen at the time was Batman the movie. It of course starred Adam West as Batman and Burt Ward as Robin. It was released to coincide with the hit TV show of the 1960s. Now while the 60s Batman TV show was super popular and super successful, they didn't really do the character of Batman justice. The entire show was filled with Silver Age silliness, and it was just absolutely satirical and comedic.
Quick! Everyone! Flee for your lives!
But the weird thing about this is that even though this was the most famous interpretation of Batman at the time, this was the only interpretation of Batman that we had in live action for this generation specifically. Now, while the 1960s Batman TV show is definitely still popular and definitely still resonates with people today, and is very likable to watch, it would very much just kind of hinder the Batman movie that we were kind of all waiting for at this point. We were wanting a darker interpretation of Batman, and this show was kind of holding it back from doing so. For the next decade, that is. By the 1970s, there was a renewed interest in making a Batman movie. CBS actually wanted to do a Batman in Outer Space movie, which would have harkened back to the 1960s Batman cheesiness. But before any of this could happen, two producers by the name of Michael Uslan and Benjamin Melniker bought the rights to Batman. They really wanted to do Batman justice this time, and they wanted to make a darker version of the Batman that we haven't really ever seen before. Something that would harken back to the works of Bill Finger and Bob Kane, the original creators of Batman. And unfortunately for the producers, they couldn't find a studio that wanted to do a dark interpretation of Batman. Every studio they went to, they just wanted to make another silly version of Batman, which is not what the public really wanted. Eventually, Uslan and Melniker found the right producers to make their definitive version of Batman, and thus they got to Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers accepted it. Which, as we all know, is still the home to many DC movies today. Their desire was to pattern the film's development after the seminal feature film of another DC legend, Superman. Superman was a wildly successful movie, something that the producers of course hoped to replace with Batman. While Superman found success because it embraced what made comics special, the studio still held on to the idea that the 60s series was Batman. They hired Tom Mankiewicz in 1983 to write a script for them. This version of the movie was to feature Robin and the Penguin, who general audiences will remember from the show. This script was very strange, and the studio actually courted Ivan Reitman to come direct the movie. They reportedly even wanted Bill Murray as Batman and Eddie Murphy as Robin. While the script had some very interesting elements, it was just overall bizarre, and it even had a climax where everything took place in a giant typewriter, which probably would have made for a very bad film. Burton was hired after the success of Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985.
Paging Mr. Herman. Mr. Herman, you have a telephone call at the front desk.
And his first act as director was to write a new treatment with his then girlfriend. He later brought in Sam Hamm to write yet another script in March 1986. Co-creator of Batman, Bob Kane, was apparently very positive about this script, and Batman was finally greenlit after almost 2 decades in April 1988. But the trouble with the Batman movie's development didn't end there. They still had to cast their main character, of course. Among the actors considered for the role of Bruce Wayne were Alec Baldwin, Jeff Bridges, Emilio Estevez, Matthew Broderick, Kevin Costner, Tom Cruise, Michael J. Fox, Harrison Ford, Robert Downey Jr., Kevin Spacey, Patrick Swayze, Dennis Quaid, Kurt Russell, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mel Gibson, Charlie Sheen, Pierce Brosnan, Tom Selleck, Daniel Day-Lewis, Tom Hanks, Kevin Kline, and Bruce Willis. Whew! Of course, the person who would actually end up being Bruce Wayne was Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton's casting was famously met with very vocal disapproval. Fans were concerned that the casting of a well-known comedy actor as Batman would lead to a repeat of the 60s show. This was compounded by the fact that the relatively short, slim Keaton didn't really embody the usual physical characteristics of Bruce Wayne. 50,000 letters were reportedly sent to Warner Brothers' office in protest. It's understandable why people would be concerned, but in hindsight, this casting was a big reason why the movie worked so well. Keaton played Bruce Wayne as a twisted Jay Gatsby, and Batman as a dark enigma. Michael Keaton, in addition to being a great actor, really dove deep into the psychology of Bruce Wayne and played him as a very strange individual. While Keaton is by no means inextricably linked to the character as, say, Christopher Reeves is to Superman, it provided a very definitive version of the character that had been long forgotten until this point. The Dark Knight's first major motion picture brought in the big guns in terms of an antagonist.
You can call me Joker.
The Joker was one of the first Batman villains, first appearing in April 1940 in the pages of Batman #1, less than a year after Batman's debut in Detective Comics #27. He soon became the Dark Knight's famous foe, and invariably shows up in most of Batman adaptations across most mediums. The Joker was as hard of a role to cast as Bruce Wayne, and the producers had to find someone who nailed the role. Brad Dourif, Tim Curry, David Bowie, John Lithgow, and James Woods were considered for the Joker, but eventually Jack Nicholson was cast. Nicholson got top billing, and as Nicholson is famously known as a big Lakers fan, the film's production was actually centered around most games. While this might seem like a little too much to appease an actor for a role, you have to understand that the producers wanted a really big name to sell the public. It also would have helped mitigated some of the bad press that the movie got. And even by this point, Jack Nicholson was considered a legend. He did an amazing job as the Joker, of course, and provided a really great foil for Keaton's Batman. The film spanned from October 1988 to January 1989 in London. The film was under such intense scrutiny by the press that the film's production had to be moved. Tim Burton has gone on record about the difficulties of getting the film made, and he's always said that he's never been particularly happy with the film. He says, and I quote, "I liked parts of it, but the whole movie is mainly boring to me. It's okay, but it was more of a cultural phenomenon than a great movie." The phenomenon Burton alludes to has been referred to as Batmania in the time leading up to the release. Anticipation for the film had reached such a fever pitch that you could barely go anywhere without running into Batman. It estimated that merchandise sales brought in as much as $750 million in this period. This was partly due to the shrewd marketing decision by Jon Peters. The film was being met with bad press by comic fans because of the casting of Keaton and the fear that it would be a comedy, so Peters made sure that a trailer was released even before the movie had finished shooting. The trailer was very different than any other trailer released at the time. It was just random scenes from the movie with very little score and no voiceover. While it may seem like an awkward trailer now, people went absolutely crazy for it. Batman finally premiered on June 19, 1989, finally ending the long and difficult journey. Batman was a huge hit in almost every sense. Like Superman the movie before it, it knew what Batman was to the core and didn't betray that. The current wave of superhero movies owes a lot to Batman. It wasn't completely comic accurate, but it doesn't matter if the foundation is still there. The Joker killed Batman's parents? Weird. Batman just kind of blows things up randomly sometimes? That's not great. There's still a lot of differences, but it still feels like a Batman movie. It didn't turn Batman into a jokester or into a vindictive murderer, it just left him to what he ultimately is. A broken man who doesn't want anybody else to die. Batman isn't a perfect movie. No movie is. But it stood the test of time, and it's still one of the best Batman movies and best comic book movies in general.